Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Zevachim daf Lamed. We are going to begin on the bottom of Chav Testament Beis. So we saw the Mishnah at the end of yesterday's daf, and now we continue the Gemara. So Omer Ilfa. So Ilfa says that the machlokes is bishtei avodos, is if we're dealing with not just one avoda out of the four avodos, but it's two totally different avodos. Look in Rashi right away. When we said at the seifa of yesterday's Mishnah that if a person has a machshava of having a kazayis tomorrow, which is at the wrong time, and then kazayis b'chutz, and a kazayis outside, which is in the wrong place, the Plig Rabbi Yehuda law. So on this, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Bishtei avodos, Mairi, that it's talking about where these two different machshavos happen during different avodos. Namely, you had one avoda where you were thinking it would be done outside of the proper place, a kazais, and for a different avoda of the Arba avodos that. However, for example, during the time of the shechita, your intention was to eat a kazayis at the wrong time, and then the kabbalah of a kabbalah manasel echel kazayis b'chutz. So aha hu depal Rabbi Yehuda, only there's Rabbi Yehuda disagree. Shari hukva b'pilug v'sulo asa machshavas psul umafkila. Okay, so that is the only time that Rabbi Yehuda would say his statement. Again, this is the Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda Zer Klal. Okay, so avol bavoda achas. If let's say this took place, both machshavas happened at the same avoda by shchita. You said I'm going to eat this chutz lizmano and chutz l'kaimai. So divrei kol ir machshavas havi. Everyone would hold that's considered to be ir of machshavas. Says Rashi, afil Rabbi Yehuda moida. Even he would agree to hukva b'pigol b'machshava mureves, because it's considered to be mixed up. So therefore, it's not going to be considered to be pigol. So again, if by one avoda at least you had one pigol machshava, then it's pigol. Even if you have a different machshava afterwards for a different avoda, but if it's two at the exact same avoda, then we're not going to say it's pigol devar kol. That's the shita of Ilfa. However, Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Even when it comes to avoda achas, even there Rabbi Yehuda would say that that it is pigol. Now, Bishlam Ilfa, I can understand Ilfa who makes the distinction between shtei avodos and avoda achas. Midaresh b'shtei avodos, seifa nami b'shtei avodos, because the seifa, which was talking about the Reish was talking about two avodos, so it makes sense. How do we see that? Because it says explicitly, Ketzad, lo karev hamatir kimitzvasai. What is that? Shachat b'chut chutz lizmano, the kibel v'hala chutz limkaimai. So it says beferish in the Reish shtei avodos, so it must be the same also. And it says kazayis l'machar, kazayis b'chutz. That probably is also talking about one was during shechita and one was during Kabbalah. In that situation, is only there's a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan. Otherwise, Rabbi Yehuda would agree with the Rabbanan. So that makes sense. So that's the reason why it's done that way. El Rabbi Yochanan Reish Mishtei Avodas V'Seif Avodat Achas. It doesn't make sense. It's not consistent. So in this the Gemara on Daf Lamed it says in Reish Mishtei Avodas V'Seif. So yeah, Reish of course is two avodas. You can't argue with that because that's what it says explicitly. But Seifa Bein Be'Avodat Achas Bein Mishtei Avodos. Fine. So there's the machlokes. Now, Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda said, Zeklal, this is a quote from the end of our Mishnah, this is a general rule. So it all depends on what's first. If your improper machshava is on the zman, then it doesn't make any difference that you had machshavas makam as well, but you're still going to be chayav kares, because when it comes to the wrong time, then you get kares, which is time. So it's all totally in the first machshava. Now, Bishlam, Rabbi Yochanan, I can understand according to the Shita Rabbi Yochanan had the Tanizak Klal. That's the reason why he says this general rule, right? He's saying that this is the rule. Apparently, it's coming, as Rashi says, it's come to include even babod achas. If you have these two machshavos, it all depends on what came first. El ilfa ma'izeh klal kasha. Okay, so Tanan Hasam. So we learned over there, and was that this Baba Kama and Tamura and the Dharm, it's numerous places, famous sugya. A person says, quote, Harizu Timuras Oila Timur Shlom. So, first of all, you said that this Timura, this exchange from one animal to the next, that exchange should be an Oila. And then you said a Shlomim. Now, obviously, the properties of an Oila are quite different than a Shlomim. So we say Harizu Timuras Oila, Dibra Meir. So Meir is of the opinion of, as Rashi says, Tafel Rishon. We go after the first thing you said. So since the first thing you said was Timuras Oila, so that's it. It's an Oila. Rabbi Yosef says, Im Lokach Nischavin, if this is your intention, Tchila, that it was to be both, perhaps that was in fact your intention. You wanted it to be both. But the reality is, it's impossible to be able to say two things at the same time, because obviously you have to say one before the other, but really want it to be both, and therefore Devar Kiyam, and Rashi says, so what do? You can't bring it as an Oila and then bring it as a Shlomim. So Rashi says, V'tira v'timacher, you have to let it graze, get a mum, sell it, v'yavi b'demei chatzi al-oil v'chatzi demeha chatzi shlom. So then you have to split the cost, half for an oil, half for shlom. Back to the Gemara, v'im mish amar, but if from the time you said harizu timuras oila, let's say you just said timuras oila, v'nimlach, and then you change your mind, v'yamar harizu timuras shlomim harizu oila. So in this case, he agrees. So in this case, that you were nimlach, so you can't be nimlach. So the first thing you said is what counts. So it's only because, according to the Shita, that really your intention was for both, so therefore you have to split 50-50. Okay. So, however, if you would have been nimlach, then everyone holds sak the din is that you would it would be an oila. Okay. All right. So iboilus. Now the Gemara asks a question. Harizu timuras oila vishlomim mahu. What happens if you decide to throw in the extra vav? Says Rashi, Mi amrina and hadapalgram meir ve'emer tavos lashon rishain. Why does he say it's only the first things? Mishum de'emer timuras trezimni. You said timura, but you didn't say it with a vav. V'havile kin nimlach. It's almost like you changed your mind. So therefore we go after the first thing. Is that the reason? But over here, since you said vishlomim, perhaps because of that, maybe both of them are chal, and therefore you have to split it 50-50, or we say no. So the Gemara says like this, and then the Gemara asks another question. In half, what's the din? It says Rashi, that maybe taka, the whole thing's an oila. So Amr, let's say he said, Hari behemazu l'chetza l'oila v'shlomim. Let's say he uses the language of half. So that sounds more likely that his intention was for literally for half of it to be an oil, so maybe the whole thing should be an oil. So this, we're going to also have another machlokas Abaye and Rabba. So Omer Abaye, Baha Vadi Moider Rameir. In that situation, Rameir will definitely agree because you said half, so obviously he's going to agree like the Shita of Rav Yosi that it's half, and therefore half is you let it graze, and half for an oil, half for shlom. Rav Omer Dain Himachlokas. Rav says no, it's not necessarily the case. Maybe Rav Yosi and Rameir still are arguing even in that case. So Amar Rava Abaye. So Rava said to Abaye, I don't understand you, Abaye. How could you possibly say that definitely Rameir would agree that split half and half? You want to tell me that for sure he agrees. However, when it comes to shchita, as we saw in our Mishnah, says Rashi, a person says lechel kazayis l'macher kazayis b'chutz, so you want to eat at the wrong time and also the wrong place. So what do we see in our Mishnah? The lechi l'chatzois dami upligi. So we see that that's comparable to like splitting in half because you're making two separate statements, and yet we see in our Mishnah that there's an argument. Says Rashi, Shahari kama zaysim yeshba, because this behema has a lot of zaysim. So therefore, it's ki'il, like you're saying, half of it I'm going to do this, and half I'm going to do that. And yet we still say they argue. So Amalei misavrit einu l'shchita el b'sayif, yishnu l'shchita mitchil v'yad sayif. So there's this famous machlokas is it that the shechita only counts at the end? Of course, it has to be shechted, but do we say that the whole process of the shechita is also from the beginning as well? Says Rashi, do you actually think that shechita is only at the end, tarti machshavos, and that therefore it's two machshavos b'soif shechita? You had two of the same machshavos at the end, because that's the only thing that counts is the end, and therefore it's like one dibor. No, yishlo shechita milchavat soif, says Rashi. V'chi heichi dimahani machshav b'soif. Just like you could have a machshav at the end of the shechita, v'chi heichi dimahani machshav b'soif, mahani b'tchilasa. Maybe because it's like two acts, so therefore you had a machshav in the beginning, you had a machshav at the end. So it's almost like it's two different acts. So the first of the two simanim, let's call it the veshet, would be chutz l'zmanoi. You had the machshav of eating at chutz l'zmanoi, and shechita siman sheni chutz l'mkaimoi. So that whole act is considered halachically like a shechita from beginning to the end, and therefore v'isla or Yehuda mafalgin b'chatzi matir dahainu chad siman. He holds that there could be a din of pigul even if all you did was had the improper machshava only by one of half of the matir. Of alaxos dechad dibora humaydi. However, maybe in the case again where it says half, maybe he will agree. So our Mishnah is not really a proof over here that he would argue, because he's only arguing in our Mishnah because it's almost like the shechita is like two different acts, so therefore it's divided into two different parts, or he has like two different sentences, if you will. However, over here he says chatzi. Armalei misavid enu shechita b'sayif, he's shechita but Mishnah Seinu, Diarmer, he said like this, which we just read already. Siman Rishon chutzes manai, Siman Sheni chutzim kaimai. So that's what his intention was. Let's look at question 1. Question 1 says like this: Mahu hahechi timsa. What's the case of chatzi makir the mafalgin boy l'chad man the oimer? So he said, if let's say first of all shchita siman echad mitoich shnayim. If let's say you had a pigul machshava during only one of the two simon of the shechita, and then we're going to ask Hari Kamitza when it comes to the Kamitza, which is comparable by the mincha to the avodah of shechita, it's comparable to like splitting it up. Says Rashi, the pligi Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan, they disagree in Masechtas Menachos that ki machashiv lecho kazayis l'macher kazayis b'chutz. They actually agree by mincha we split it into two also with kamitza, and frankincense. And nonetheless, we see that he argues. No hasam nami demer kaimitz mincha chutz l'zmanu kaimitz levayna chutz l'mkaimai. So basically, what it's doing again, just like the two shchitas, it's where you make mafalga machati matir, is because you have to have the kaimitz and levayna. So therefore, it's the same thing. And therefore, this is the second answer, question 1, which again says, Heichi timsa the chad matir mafalgan boichad mandi aimer bakdaris akaimitz o halavana. So during the time of the kamitza, but not also the lavoina. Okay. Hari kaimitz the minchas chayte. How about when it comes to a minchas chayte? So a person who sinned brings a mincha. Now there, the lake lavoina. There is no frankincense that's brought by that mincha. Bahadei uplegi, but they argue, but you can't split it in half over there. What do you mean, low plegi? So you're low plegi. The answer is they don't argue over there. They agree over there because you're right. You can't split it. And if you want to tell me they argue, plegi bevasios. They argue with steps, says Rashi. We're talking about the machshava while you're walking to in the avoda. The aimer betvis b'svia rishayna chutz l'zmanoi. Your first couple of steps, you're thinking chutz l'zmanoi. Sia shnia chutz l'mkaimai. Dahavlu trei diburi. So therefore, that could be another situation. You're right. Maybe we're not talking about a situation of like the kamitza and the levayna. If there's no levayna, so we can just say it's talking about halacha, and it can be split there. Rav Shimi Barashi Masni Kirabai, Rav Huna Bar Nasan Masni Kirabba. He also Rav Diyamon Rav Meir Bishitas Rabbi Hudamr. So he actually holds like the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, as we quoted before in our Mishnah, that the Omer Tafas Lashon Rishon, that you go after the first thing. The non Omer Rabbi Yehuda Zaklal. We see clearly that from our Mishnah. Imachshavas Hasman Kadma Es Machshavas Hamakom Pig of Chayim of Kares. Now, why are you Chayv Kares? Because your first statement was about Zman, and therefore, even though your second statement was about Makoim, but the first statement is what matters. So we see clearly, like the Shita Rabbi Yehuda holds, similar to Rameir, that these Tafas Lashon Rishon. Okay, as we continue to Lamed Amid Beis, so Amrle Abaye Abaha Oimer Rabbi Merchan Oimer Rabbi Yochanan. He said that Kima Gasluhu Rameir Rabbi Yosi Bahadi Adadi Will Pligi. He said that when Rameir and Rabbi Yosi come together, they don't argue. What does that mean? It says Rashi, Devayu Lesu Tafos Lashon Rishon, Kunavarsha Kameh. Actually, they don't necessarily agree to this Tafos Lashon Rishon, which is kind of difficult to understand because we said by Timuris Oil, Timuris Shlomim, it's an oil. It sounds like we do. Your Tafos Lashon Rishon. So Gemara is going to explain that later on. But however, Rashi says, V'hilka Chafil Rameir the Timuris Shchita Loy Savak Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. One second, Will Pligi, you tell me they don't argue? You tell me that Rameir and Rabbi Yossi don't argue? But Mifli Pligi, we just saw clearly that they do argue. That one says it's an oil, the other one says you split it. So Amalei Pligi, they do argue, but my de Pligi. Below Pligi, but my de low Pligi. This is a great one. They argue with what they argue about, but they don't argue what they don't argue about. It says Rashi, Chachi Kermer, Tafos Lashon Rishon, El B'daite de Gavra, B'hoichachas diburoi al machashavtoi. Avaturvayu islahu de baser kavanoso azlinan. They both agree that you go baser the kavana of the person. Because that's why everyone agrees. If a person would originally say Techol zeh v'yacher kach oimer techol zeh, so divir kol will chayle. So in this situation, everyone would agree, says Rashi, the ein kedusha chala al kedusha, right? And once you say this is sanctified, then this one is sanctified. You can't sanctify. You can't put a kedusha on a kedusha. Lo tachol zeh el im kein chol zeh. If you say that this one will only kick in if the other one does, then divir kol chayil. Then it actually would work according to everyone because that was your kavana. And therefore, of course, in that situation, you would have to have the animal graze, and then you would split the money in half. So, ki pligi the yarmer timur sola timur shlomim. Rameir savar medahavila meimer timur sola vishlomim, because he could have added the vav instead of yarmer timur sola timur shlomim. He said without a vav, shmamina must be mahadir kahadir be. It must mean that he was just trying to back out of his original words. And once that's all his intention is, so we say, I'm sorry, you can't back out anymore, and therefore it's an oila. Rabbi Yosi, if it would have said above, havamina palga tumurus oila palga tumurus shlomim, you would think that half of it is half and half. Lachiyamer tumurus oila tumurus shlomim, remember to tell you the kula oila, that really its own oil of a kula shlomim. Very interesting. It's not. You would think that it's half and half, but the truth is it's 100% and 100%. So Armalei whoimer will plague you. You say they don't argue, they say they do argue. So the point is, the reality is the whole thing is an oil, the whole thing is a shlamim. It's just the reality that you can't. Obviously, you'll be able to have to split the money. So says Rashi. Ihu oimer will pligi, but anu amin in the pligi. Af ba'oimer temuris oil vishlomim. Even if he does that above, he holds the argue even there. Shenischavin l'shneim islay l'rameir tafas lashon rishon kirb Yehuda. Okay, so oimer ulavi temasam says Rav Oishia efsher yadinan chavrin bevlaw. Is it possible that you know these people? The kazayis tanan, or kazayis vikazayis tanan. Does it say kazayis with a vav or not? Says Rashi. Do Rabbi Yehuda havi prata? So if it's without a vav, then he's like making each one separately. Ukshte machshavas denu. It's like two machshavas. Feel bavoda achas, and even maybe by avoda achas v'tavash rishain. We go after the first machshava, and that's why it will be pigel. Avol k'zayis ukazayis. If let's say he says it with a vav, then maybe he'll hold ir machshavas have it into pigel. It's all mixed up in there. It's not going to be pigel. So that's the question. Does Rabbi Yehuda hold it's kazayis vikazayis, or did he say kazayis? And therefore, if he said kazayis, but if he said kazayis vilkazayis, maybe it wouldn't be good, right? So this is how we read it. Kazayis tanan of kazayis vikazayis divrei hakol ir machshavos havi. Since you added the vav, obviously it's mixed together. Ol dilma kazayis ukazayis tanan. That he even disagrees there. The Rabbi Yehuda prata havi. He'll still say it's separate, and it'll still be considered to be pigel, even though it's a vav. The kol shekin kazayis, that's certainly to be pigel. So basically the question is, when you say kazayis ukazayis, would Rabbi Yehuda say that it's pigel, or do we say ir of machshavos? So Tashma, the Bamine, Levi Murebi, Chishav Lechel Kazayis Lamachar, Bachutz, Mahu. So, here it's really one statement, but in this statement, you talk about one Kazayis, and you talk about doing two things wrong with it. But you started off talking about time, and then you talked about place. So, Amalei Zush Elah, this is a question, Ir Machshavos Havoy. Clearly it's Ir Machshavos, and therefore, it's not going to be pigel. So Reb Shimon Berebi, this is our Mishnah. It says kazayis b'chutz, kazayis l'machar, kazayis b'chutz, or kachatzi zayis b'chutz, kachatzi zayis l'machar, kachatzi zayis l'machar, zayis b'chutz. Puzzle. It says clearly puzzle. However, it says v'in bokaris. There's no din karis because there's no pigel in this case, alts being chayav because of chutzum koimoi, chutzul zmanoi. Ha'idoch, however, the other case is ir machshavos havoy. So it's the same thought as not pigel, even according to Yehuda. So Armalei, who shall be davar chachma? You asked me a thought of wisdom. Yad Amri Mishnah Seinu, and you say it's a Mishnah. Lididach diasnina, according to you, it was taught to you. Tarti, two ways, with and without the vav. Lo kashalach, and it's not a kasha to you. Lididei lo yisnu el chada. I only learned it as one case, kazayis, without a vav. V'shamilu rabbanan the kagarsi tarti. So v'savar didi davka. According to my version, it's davka. V'didhu, according to you, with a vav, ir machshavos havoy. Is it ir machshavos with a vav because it's connecting the two machshavos, and therefore it can't be pigel. O dilma didhu davka. Maybe it's davka. V'didi shiri sharili. When the sharili l'didi hasharlu l'didhu nami b'hoch. Okay. So v'hai asni. So who learns v'ilema kazayis ukazayis asni? Let's say it was with a vav. Hai lav shiru. So you didn't leave anything out. El kazayis asni. That's how it was learned. Without the vav. V'tiboyli kazayis. And the kash is, what's the din kazayis? Right? I learned about zayis, and the kash is kazayis with a vav. So savar iboymnei chada. I thought like this. I'm going to ask one. Dishamani tarti, and I'll hear two. Dibi ina kazayis. Because if I ask the question about kazayis and kazayis, so hanicha, I oimerli klala. If you tell me a general rule, koshakin kazayis l'machar b'chutz el iyamer li prata. If you only tell me a prat, akati kazayis l'machar b'chutz kol meboili, I would have another question, and therefore that's the reason why I was posed to be able to get two answers out of it. Yochi hashninami hatinach oimer le kazayis l'machar kazayis b'chutz. Prata, if you would say that that's still considered to be a prat, koshkin kazayis ukazayis, el yarmer klola, akati kazayis meboy. We still have to ask that kasha. So im kain mirsach rasli. Rebbe would have gotten upset if it was framed in that way, because hashda kazayis ukazayis ukazayis with a vav. Klola, they were saying it's considered like connected. So kazayis l'machar b'chutz meboy. So therefore, I didn't even want to posed that question. Okay. All right. We're going to stop there. Let's look at question 2. Be'ez oifen afil Rabbi Huda moida. Where do we find that even Rabbi Huda would agree? If you have a machshav of time and then chusim kaimo have iru machshavos, that's considered to be a mixture, and therefore it's not going to be. And we're not going to go after the first lashon. So he said, if you were chishiv lecha kazayis l'macher b'chutz. So in the case where you had basically you linked them both, right? So you said kazayis l'macher b'chutz, right, in one statement. So therefore, then it's definitely Eruv, and therefore it's not going to be Pigel in that situation. Question TA 10. Tanan, Harzu Tumur Shlamim, Harzu Tumur Oila. Apparently because he goes Lashon Rishon. So Mashne Talmim, Rameir, my Nafkiminayim. So he said one is because since he said Tumuras Oila, maybe actually, then he said Tumuras Shlamim, he's Nimlach. Maybe it just means he changed his mind. Or Svirli Oila Tafos Lashon Rishon, that he just goes after the first Lashon. And in Nafkaminas, he says Tumuras Oila Vishlamim. If he says Tumuras Oila Vishlamim, so then in that situation, it would be questionable because on one hand, if he says it that way, it doesn't seem like he's Nimlach, but we do see that maybe it would still be Tafos Lashon Rishon. That was TA 10. Did I write that down as TA 10? Yeah. So it says the boil who harzu tumuras oil vishlam imahu. Okay, fine. Question TB 9. B'ma nechlu tanakar Yehuda b'kazayis l'mach kazayis b'chutz ihavi pigol olo. So how do we find Tanakam the Rabbanan disagree with regard to kazayis l'mach or kazayis b'chutz, which is our Mishnah basically? Right, Chatzi Zayis, Chatzi Zot. So this is what I wrote, and I'm just going to write as Chav Tes Samid Beis, and then going into Lamed. So Hoyel Hu Oimer Shnei Devarim Hamafalgin Im Oimrim Tafos Lashon Rishon O Hu Chayzer Al Divara V'Al Das Rishon Hu Oimer. I don't think that's what they're looking for over here. I think they're looking for Ilfa, that the Machloikus is B'Shtei Avodos of Avoda Achas Tiber Kol Irav Machshavos Havi. Or Rav Yochanan Noimer Ba'avoda Achas Machlokas. I think that is really the answer to that question. So I'm just gonna go with that. I think that's really the Machlokas Tanakam Rabbi Yehuda. You could say it's based on being Tafos Lashon Rishon, right? But also it is maybe there is some truth to that. Tafos Lashon Rishon is worthwhile, or the Machlokis Ilfa and Rav Yochanan. Okay, let's do one more question. We'll stop. Harizu Tumuras Oil, Tumuras Shlomim, Harizu Tumuras Oila, Dibra Meir. Again, what are the two reasons? Are either he's Tafos Lashon Rishon. Okay, this is correct. Or Im al Das Rishon Hu Oimer. It's not exactly what the answer is. Let's see what the other answer is. Because he was Nimlach. He wanted Tumura, so he's like Havi Kinimlach. Kinimlach. It's like he changed his mind. Okay? And Nafkamina Lamali, Moimer Shneim, Kazayas Lamachar Bechutz, Ma Hadin. That's not actually the answer. The answer is if a person would say Temuras Oila Temur Shlomim. Harzu Temuras Oila. Okay, so that's the actual Nafkamina Adkan.